This episode of the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast is brought to you by CRE Launch Pro. This online commercial real estate program is designed to take you from beginner to pro commercial real estate investor with access to all of my courses, our online community, and monthly group coaching calls. Learn how to confidently buy your first commercial property today at www.crelaunchpro.com. Welcome back to the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast. Today we are live with Ron Rohde, who you may recognize as a guest from before. And here on Sunday, this upcoming Sunday, we're going to be releasing a story of the deal video on an industrial outdoor storage property that he acquired in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which we were able to check out while we were in town visiting Very Space. And I figured today we'd have Ron in to talk more about industrial outdoor storage. It's a very hot topic. And in my opinion, it's an incredible covered land play if you do it the right way. But it's not just set it and forget it, right? It may be a little less complicated than some other aspects of commercial real estate, but there are still some nuances that you've got to keep in mind as you're going into this. So, Ron, that is a brief introduction of yourself, but tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into industrial real estate.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. It's good to see you again. So my background is as a commercial real estate attorney. I've been a practicing lawyer for almost 15 years. And this was what I did, transactional real estate, helping investors buy, manage, lease, and then sell commercial real estate. So eventually, I kind of got tired of them seeing their net to seller. And those were the big numbers. I said, these guys are idiots. I'm not any dumber than they are. And I have the capital. So why not? I can be a dumb idiot too. But that's kind of my story. I started off in SFR like a lot of people. I had 6 units. Some of them were free and clear, but they're all rented with property management. But it's just too much. I was starting a law firm. I'm married. I've got 2 kids. It's too much to handle on a day-to-day. So fast forward, this is about 5 or 6 years ago, sold everything, which I thought was a great time in DFW 6 years ago, sold everything for great appreciation, great cash on cash, and dumped all that equity into a couple industrial properties. And these were single tenant, net leased, triple net leased, about 30 and 40,000 square feet of property. And it's going great. But fast forward to the last 2 years, we've really focused on industrial outdoor storage.
So tell us what industrial outdoor storage is.
So we define it as any type of low coverage site as defined by 20% or less of the total square footage is covered in improvements. So that's primarily going to be, a small building, maybe a small office, a warehouse, a truck terminal. Maybe it could be a maintenance shed, but it has less than 20% of the total square footage. And again, I'll caveat a little bit and kind of tipping off the future conversation, looking at flood zones, looking at buildable square footage. It's very, very tricky once you go to unimproved land because you don't necessarily know that a 5-acre site is actually 5 acres of usable square footage. You have flood zone, you have different technical issues. And so it's reduced based on your buildable square footage. But that's how I define it. And the zoning has to allow for outdoor storage of some shape or form by right. And that's what I would technically define as industrial outdoor storage.
So how do you go about finding deals like this? I mean, are you looking on LoopNet, or is this talking to brokers, or?
So, like most things, it's kind of a story. When we first started doing this, our deal sizes were too small. These are between, we're buying infill, just to clarify. So within the boundaries of DFW. So we're not talking about farmland. We're not in the county. We are solidly within the city in industrial districts, tends to be within industrial districts, but this is infill. And so these are still at 3 to 4 to 500,000 an acre, maybe even more. But it's still too small for a lot of brokers to want to deal with. I think maybe going forward, they are interested in these deals. But anyway, so we couldn't get the time of day from brokers. So we had to build our own off market network. And what that means is you go on Google Maps, you start looking at some of these prop stream services, and just make a list of every single property in your market that you would be willing to buy. And it may seem daunting, but once you get to see a lot of the properties, I can eliminate really, really quickly. And I'm just savage. If something is not right, I just cross it off. And what you'll end up with is we have a list of, call it 200 or 300 sites that if I could buy all of these, I'd be done. That's a lifetime worth of buying, but I'd be a very, very rich person. And you just rank them with a composite score based on, try to keep it simple. Say 5 factors of iOS: proximity to highways, the shape of the lot, the slope of the lot, the zoning. Because even within zoning, there's different industrial types of zoning that are better for outdoor storage. And then finally, might be just kind of like the owner or the current use. It has cash flow. It's kind of a wild card. But you come up with a composite because there are some properties that are a better size, but not a great location. Some properties that have a better use, but not as great improvements. So you just come up with a composite and you rank all these sites and you just start at the top. These days, the amount of off market information you can get about a seller is incredible. I mean, we get emails, and we may get a lot of email addresses for various sellers, and you just pound them. We do text messages, we do phone calls, we do flyers, we do emails, and you just keep flooding, call it the initial 30 or 50, and you see who responds. And so all of our deals, I would say, have been off market and kind of either brought to us, or we shook the trees and made the deal happen.
Yeah, I like that approach because that's pretty much what a broker would be doing. I mean, I have my brokerage team doing something very similar with their prospecting. It's pick 600 properties that are the top tier properties that you want to list or sell or transact in any sort of way, and hit them once a quarter, because that's 10 a day during business days every quarter. So all you need are 600 properties. And if you get 1% of those properties to respond in any given quarter, you're doing pretty well. Let's see, the king of industrial real estate himself, Chad Griffiths, just jumped in. Chad, what's going on, man? Thank you for joining us. Ron and I are obviously both very good friends with Chad. So good to see you there, man. Ron, tell us, what makes a site ideal for industrial outdoor storage?
So the ideal site for us represents the most number of exit opportunities. And I've talked about this before. If you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I talk about it a lot. But before you buy, before you close, what is your exit? Who are you going to sell to, and what do they want to see in the property? So our ideal iOS will have a lot of characteristics that we could either intentionally improve, or we can rely on the market to improve to create the best exit for us. And, for us as a seller, it's not necessarily always the highest price, right? Maybe an owner user will pay the highest price per foot ever, but that doesn't necessarily help us if we're not in an environment where there's a lot of owners trying to buy, if there's consolidation or whatever. And so instead, we want to make sure that we have multiple exits that are all around the same price point, because it gives us leverage when we're negotiating with any one buyer. Hey, well, you're an investor and you see that the way that we do, and it's a great cap rate and it's increasing NOI. But if you don't want to buy it, we have a developer over here that's also valuing it on a same price per foot basis, and he's going to build vertical because the site is clear, it's ready to go, no demolition. You can work with the city. The city is pretty eager to actually develop these sites into vertical tax dollars, and so I can argue that. So if I've got an investor sale, I can put pressure on him that I have a developer waiting in the wings. If, for example, my tenants are occupying the property and they're putting an offer to me, say, hey, Ron, we want to buy it. We like the location. We really want to lock in and control our future. We want to buy it. I'll say, okay, great. But I've got, another buyer also interested. So I think I've touched on that, but another investor just on NOI increases and cap rate. You have the tenant as an owner user, as a possible buyer, developer, is an exit. And I guess ultimately too, you could also say you could recapitalize and develop it yourself. But that's a lot of exits. That is more than some other industrial properties. Or like for a multifamily, you can only sell to another investor. I mean, maybe you could do condo conversions or something. I've heard those are kind of coming back in vogue. Maybe the
Yeah.
reverse fracture. But the point is, if you buy an office building with a ton of tenants, you don't have a lot of options, and it's not necessarily cheap to demo the building and build from scratch. So what we like about iOS is the ideal site will have lots of exits. You're going to look for development characteristics. You're going to look for flat. You're going to look for buildable square footage, not just usable for iOS square footage, but those exits. So that's what makes an ideal site.
I like that strategy going into it because you always have another route to take, which is incredibly important as an investor, especially in a market like what we're in today, right? If you were just hoping that some private equity firm was going to buy it on a cap rate and you didn't have the, hey, we could sell it to the tenants, we could sell it to another developer, we could sell it to, the neighbor. I mean, if you don't have those options, it's going to be really tough to transact in this environment. I love industrial outdoor storage as a covered land play because it allows you to cash flow the land, make some pretty decent money, but then where you really can make a big pop is on that exit if you're buying in the path of development. Let's see, Chad's got another question here. How do you mitigate environmental risks when you're dealing with smaller tenants on shorter term leases? Or another way of asking, how often are you conducting ESAs and holding tenants accountable if there are any signs of contamination? Obviously, in industrial real estate, that is always of concern because you as the landlord will have to deal with that. And environmental risks could cost you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases.
Yeah, so it's absolutely a concern. I have two issues, kind of like live environmental issues right now that we had to engage a geotechnical engineering firm, Terracon. And so we had them come out. This was regarding fill dirt, but basically, contaminated fill that the tenant. I guess I can sort of. So the tenant was scooping out clean fill from the site and replacing it with some trash from their excavation jobs because that's what they store like bulldozers and backhoes and different types of graders on the site. But they were poaching fill dirt from the site, backfilling it with some concrete and rebar and chipped up, trash basically from their jobs, and then putting dirt over the top of it. And my client realized it and had to bring the hammer down because they're a real company. They weren't just kind of fly by night. So I would say yes, that's an issue for us too. We do a lot of semi truck parking. Oil, right? Petroleum products is a big concern as they're doing oil changes every week. But having active boots on the ground to observe these things, early recognition is going to be the most important thing for all of this. And so you've got to have that consistent boots on the ground. And again, maybe it could be cameras, but you've got to be checking the footage. You've got to be, zooming around and looking at it. Or that means sending somebody by to physically inspect, give them a checklist, ask for photos, ask for video, have them walk to all four corners, check behind things, look at the fence line. But yes, I think you have a heightened risk of those types of things for the reasons that Chad mentioned, and yeah, funny enough, we do have two issues with environmental right now. It hasn't gone to anything bad, but you definitely need to be more aware of that than other buildings.
That's right, and when you're buying any sort of commercial real estate, if you're using a lender, the lender is going to require you to do a phase one environmental. Where people get themselves into a lot of trouble is when they're paying cash. They don't have a lender saying, hey, I need this environmental report. And I've seen investors just buy properties without even digging into the environmental, and that is a recipe for a disaster. Do not do that. Go out, get a phase one environmental at the very minimum in order to make sure you know fully what you are getting into. So, Ron, let's assume you've found a site, like one of your 200 or 300 sites that checks the boxes. What are you looking at when you get out to the property, and what are you planning in your head for the next steps of that site?
Yeah, so when we do an additional initial drive by, we're going to be looking at the area and what is surrounding this site. Is it commercial? Is it retail? Is it other industrial properties? Because I think the ideal neighbors for us, obviously, it's not residential. There's a fair amount of residential sites that will abut residential zoning, and you don't want that. That really restricts your certain uses, or you've got to put up very expensive, kind of tall fencing as a barrier. But we look at that neighborhood, and then we look at the freeways. The site that we went to is fantastic because it has three major highways all directly adjacent within half a mile in three different directions. You go and hit three major highways. That's something that we look for, that if it's easy access, and I'm not sure how to describe it if you're just on Google Maps, because sometimes a property is proximately close to a freeway, but when you go actually drive, you realize that that freeway is elevated. Maybe it doesn't have an exit, maybe it doesn't have an on-ramp, and so it looks proximately close, but if you actually try to drive onto the highway, it may take you 10 minutes. And I'm not sure if that's a good example, but that's what you try to get a sense for, is what type of district is this in? What type of activities would the city encourage or permit? And crime. Outdoor storage is inherently about security of the goods, and so if you don't have a secure yard, tenants are not going to lease with you. And so that's critical to understand from driving around. Maybe you drive by at night, because you'll start to see signs. And again, I don't think you're going to know this the very first time, but I promise you, if you drive 10 different yards and 10 different lots, you will see some that you say, this looks like crime is an issue, and this looks safer. And I don't know how to necessarily tangibly say, sagging fences, or you'll see chain link fence where it's kind of stretched along the lines. And you just look at it and you're like, oh, maybe somebody was trying to get in, or maybe it got pushed by a truck. I'm not sure what the reason is, but the only way that I would say you can do that is to drive 10 different iOS lots looking for quote unquote, these factors, and then you'll start to develop a gut feel yourself. And that's something we look for. We look at the number of improvements. Obviously, if it's an improved yard with gravel or some type of crushed concrete, asphalt, if it is, or concrete is what we have in Texas. Fencing, what's the condition, the quality? Is it barbed wire, 3-strand barb? How high is it? Gating, lighting, what's the type of technology of the lighting? That's kind of an easy win area. You can get these great LED lights now that use less power, more light, better controls, motion sensors. The technology on lighting has come a long way, and I guarantee if you drive 10 of these yards, you're going to see the old halogen halide, ballast style, where it's like purplish light. And you're like, holy cow, this thing is 42 years old and half of them don't work. So easy kind of value add that you can spot when you're driving. And, again, you don't necessarily capture that from photos. You don't see it in Google Maps. The little light box looks pretty small and generic. You don't know if it's something current or something old. But yeah, that's the critical short list that we look for on a site visit.
Yeah, so it sounds like some easy value adds, adding fencing or better fencing, probably an electric gate, right? Remote controlled access so that the tenants can come in and out. You talked about LED lighting, maybe even security cameras.
Yes.
Earlier you mentioned that, you're looking in the $300,000 to $500,000 an acre range. So let's walk through finances. I mean, if I buy an acre for $300,000, how many trucks can I expect to fit on that lot, and what can I expect them to pay?
Yeah, so for semi-truck parking, we are typically allocating out 75 feet by, I'll say 12. It's kind of a range, and there's a formula based on the width of your hall access, your aisle access, because I don't see if we can do a diagram, but as the truck pulls in, the more angle he has to put in, he can slot the trailer into a narrower spot. So if you have a very, very wide aisle, call it infinite width, you can make them about 11 feet wide. That's like folding the mirrors in. But if you have only 150 foot or 135 feet in the aisle, then you're going to need probably 12 to 13 feet. So I say that because it's not an exact science, but let's use that 75 times 12 feet. So that's 900 feet for every parking space. So let's just call it, 1,000. Um, we know our mnemonic devices, right? Four nuns drove down I-35 at 60 miles an hour. That's how you know how many feet are in an acre. Do you know
I
that?
didn't know that.
Um, yeah. So with that aisle, you're looking at, call it 40 parking spaces. And then from that math, so we have 40 parking spaces. If you're paying 300, I would maybe say your rates are 175 a month. Um, so that'd be 7,000 in gross rent if you are fully leased, which our demand is pretty high. So fully leased, I think, is a fine assumption to get to. It just may take you some lease up time, but
What would be
oh,
typical? Like if you're underwriting it, what would be a good conservative guess? Like 80 to 90% occupancy?
oh, 90s for sure. No, upper 90s. I think our problem that we run into if we have any vacancy is that those parking spaces are just impossible to get kind of in and out of. They're like right at the end, or they don't have an angle, or yeah, I think that's the only reason. Or they park next to somebody that's terrible. But definitely, you should shoot for mid 90s.
Okay. Awesome. And so you said you're going to gross probably 7,000 a month on 40 trucks.
Yep.
So what are your expenses going to look like?
Yeah. So property taxes, that's your big one. Insurance. Again, we're in Texas, so we're probably running closer to 2% uh, of value. So you'll have property taxes off of that one. So what is six? Oh,
Six
yeah,
grand, 2%
6,000.
of
Yeah.
300.
So what was I at? I was running a total. So 84 minus 6,000. Insurance, call it another 2 grand. 1, 2, 3. And then management. And this is kind of your biggest expense for personnel, but also kind of the hardest to estimate. Um, I think that we self-manage, so we don't necessarily charge a market fee trying to make a profit. We just kind of pass the expenses um, along to the property. But yeah, that's the hardest part, is figuring out the manage. So maybe I'll put in like $1,000 a month, um, which maybe
Yeah, I
you
mean,
could get.
let's
Mhm.
go further into that. I mean, if you're self-managing
Yep.
and I mean, you've got a full-time job, right?
Sure.
So it
Sure.
seems like this is something that it'd be possible for you to self-manage without, taking up an immense amount of time. How many hours a week would you say it typically takes you, managing the site?
So I have a team of five employees that are, I say they work for the law firm, but I definitely commandeer them a lot for my investments, and so it maybe takes them 5 hours a week. The problem with this, and I think it's true for real estate deals in general, it's not just 5 hours when you choose the 5 hours. When
Right.
something happens, you have to respond immediately. You have to drop what you're doing and pick up the phone, and the police are at your property, and what's going on? Okay, I'll send somebody and fix it. Or there's a fire, or a tenant issue. And so that's the difference. And I have the customer service to answer the phones. We use a great piece of software. I mean, Easy Storage is what we use. Maybe we can drop a link later, but the software helps a lot because it allows multiple people to say do text messaging. So that's another one of our value adds, is a lot of these lots, if they're existing truck parking, terrible customer service. It's like you got to mail in a check, or you drop off a check somewhere at your landlord's office to get paid once a month, and you'll get like a handwritten receipt. So when we buy these properties, they literally have a seller rent roll that's written on paper and summed up with a calculator. We transfer everything to online, where now our tenants they can see their full ledger, they can see their history, they can see their taxes, their payments. You can pay with credit card, debit card. We do text messaging for questions and complaints and all that stuff, and it's all on the website. And so we can do teamwork to respond to text messages. Because I don't know, like one of our lots, well, the lot you went to, it has over 100 trucks. It's not really 100 tenants, but it's a fair number of people. Where when something happens, we may get 10 or 15 or 20 text messages about it. And then we kind of have to engage in people. And so it's nice to divide and conquer. You can see the text message history. So, I can jump in for somebody else. But the answer is I don't do a lot of that day to day. I would say I do zero of it. I have once a weekly meeting with my team that's handling it. And I don't do anything quote day to day on an urgent basis. Because it is a fair amount of work. You have to be able to a little bit flexible. So maybe it's good for somebody that works remotely, or they're online a lot, and they do have some flexibility that somebody calls you and you can respond and send somebody or ask to look at pictures and do that. But yeah, it's like herding cats a little bit. But once you kind of get a system down, management becomes so much easier, and we've talked about it before. But the systems that you institute and the more scale that you can get, because I love every problem that we encounter, because then we learn how to do it and apply it to our next properties, and we add something to our checklist that says, oh, make sure you do this and make sure you ask for that, and get a copy of this driver's license before you do that, and DOT numbers for the trucks. Every time we learn, we roll out that application to all the other sites. And that's huge, where we learn from our own problems a lot faster. Because if you've got one property, it sucks. You spend a bunch of time to make $2,000 a month, and then you've got to spend $5,000 to fix something, and that's like your cash flow for a month. So that's how we manage it. I think it definitely can be done. And if you have a willingness to learn about the industry a little bit, you will find it's very easy, right? I mean, these are all, at the end of the day, the reason we invest in industrial is these are businesses. These are not irrational people who think you're a slumlord or have, emotional distress because of something you did, or the dog park is unavailable. I should not pay rent. I'm like, get out of here. These are people trying to run a business. The minimum standard, the bar to me is, can my business function? And that's like all industrial tenants everywhere. Can my business function? Yes or no? Because if it's yes, they're not going to bother you. If the answer is no, well, I think as an owner, I've got to fix that problem. And it's pretty urgent, because if they can't run their business, other people can't run their business. And so it is a priority for me to fix whatever is going on.
For sure. So just to clarify before we get to the NOI, that 175 a month per truck is a gross number, right? Because it's going to be tough to break it up, to divide utilities among everybody, all that kind of stuff. So I think we were at 64,000 net. So we started off at 84. We subtracted 6,000 for your taxes. We subtracted 2,000 for insurance, and then we got down to by 12,000 for management. So that puts us at 64. What do you think you spend typically on utilities? It's probably not that much, right? Because it's a little.
It's not much, but it is. I don't know. Utilities are expensive in Texas. I mean, paying 13 cents a kilowatt hour, but
wow,
it's a little bit deceiving. Yeah, because we have a fair number of lights that are on a lot. But yeah, and it's all commercial. So that's another thing. This is a topic for another video.
They just charge you more.
About the security lights, I've had a lot of people ask me, like, well, Ron, do you provide internet? Do you provide Wi-Fi to these truckers who, a lot of them are doing business out of their cabs? They're sitting in there on their phone or on their laptop. Do you provide Wi-Fi? And I said, I don't, because for a 5.5 acre yard to provide mesh network, it would just be insane. And that's another cost that some people come in and think like, oh, internet, it's $50 a month. I can get AT&T, whatever. I'm like, no, you think you can, but you can't. And when you call them, AT&T sees the address and it pulls up as commercial, and they're like $250. And I'm like, what? No, I want the slow plan. I want the smallest, whatever. And they're like, you're commercial. your minimum monthly charge is $250. I don't care how much data you use, it's $250. And so you can't do things cheaply in commercial. Save that, make it into a short. But that's the answer of everything we run into is, oh, do you want to do Wi-Fi? Well, it costs this. Oh, you want electricity run to your site? $100 a month for just the hookup charges, no usage charges at all. So that's my answer is why it's kind of expensive, because can't do anything cheaply in commercial. And even iOS qualifies as commercial.
Yeah, so we're down to what, 58,000 if you subtract another $6,000 for utilities per year.
And I would pop another 1,000 for like software and different service license and professional.
Yeah, and so is that pretty much what you could expect overall?
Yeah, what are we at? 50? I mean,
57,000. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great number just on a cash unlevered yield on cost.
Yeah, I mean, that's a 19% cap rate.
Yeah. Well, that's
assuming the 300,000 you don't have to do anything to the lot. Everything's already there. So,
Yep.
That's probably going to be rare.
Yeah, but those are capital improvements. I don't mind that, because you could probably juice that return with some positive leverage debt too. So in your micro example, that would be what you would expect for that type of lot. The challenges to finding that are, again, sourcing the property, because that thing's not going to be listed on CoStar. It's not going to be on LoopNet. One other source that I would recommend is, actually, we found a couple of good lots listed on Redfin or MLS. They were incorrectly listed in residential databases or multiple listing services. And it doesn't happen a lot, but I would say once or twice a month, just do a search for that. Look at the land. And if you see anything that's development, or if it's bigger, and if it's incorrectly listed for like residential development, but it's actually zoned industrial, that's a lot of times you can get a mispriced asset that way, because clearly they've got a listing agent that doesn't know what they're doing, and they've mispriced it as some type of residential when it really is highest and best is industrial. And we've seen a couple that, we've talked to the sellers and the listing agent about, because they're just mislocated, because they have zero traction, right? They have no interest.
So what surprised you about industrial outdoor storage, or what did you wish you knew going into it?
I wish I knew a lot more about the city certificate of occupancy process, and working with them a little bit more proactively, I would say, even before I bought.
Okay. And how do you find tenants? I mean, are you putting a sign up out front, or what does this look like?
Yeah, so definitely signage. I think that we use Facebook a lot. We use Google My Business. We get thousands of clicks on our Google My Business pages. And, from those thousands of clicks, we get hundreds of inquiries. I don't know what would go. I actually just saw the monthly summary, but we get phone calls. We get dozens of phone calls. We get emails through the website. We get a lot of traction just from, I don't say organic SEO, but people look for truck parking near me on Google, and boom, you want to have some Google reviews, and people will know that you exist.
Yeah, here's some truck parking near you. Come, give me a call. Awesome. Well, Ron, I appreciate you jumping in for this conversation around industrial outdoor storage. If anybody in the audience listening wants to get a hold of you to talk about, working with them from the legal perspective, or investing with you, or any of that, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I would say the best way is my YouTube channel, same name, Ronald Rohde Law. Then it's got the website, ronaldrohdelaw.com.
Wonderful. Ron, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you all for listening, and we will see y'all in the next one. This episode of the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast is brought to you by CRE Launch Pro. This online commercial real estate program is designed to take you from beginner to pro commercial real estate investor, with access to all of my courses, our online community, and monthly group coaching calls. Learn how to confidently buy your first commercial property today at www.crelaunchpro.com.